Hello everyone, I am Harshad Sarunkhe, Faculty of Botany with Rao IIT Academy. Today we will discuss something about floral formula and study some angiosperm families. Now friends, earlier with our discussion on morphology of flowering plants, where we have studied parts like the roots, the stem, the leaves, apart from flowers, fruits and seeds, we have understood the morphological features, we have described them and also understood different types of variations in these plants. Now all these morphological features are unique to some groups, are unique to some taxonomic groups known as families. Taxonomists have used these morphological characters and based on their similarities and dissimilarities, they have classified plants into unique entities or unique groups, forming the taxonomic categories. The category that we would be discussing is that of a family. Now to study these angiosperm families, we take into account the distinguishing features of groups of plants. Now over the years, taxonomists realized that the reproductive characters of the flower are more stable, they are more conservative as compared to the vegetative features of the root, stem and leaves. That's where the characters of the flower are more commonly used for classification of plants. Now as we study the flower, that is anthology, we have understood the four floral whorls along with the parts like the pedicel, the thalamus and the bracts. Now we have been describing these features, which would take quite a long time. Now to make our studies easier, to make it more systematic, more convenient, taxonomists have developed something known as floral formulae, where the different parts, the variations, the attachments, they are given some special symbols. So when we actually describe a plant, or rather when we describe the plant based on its flower, we would be using these symbols, and giving a floral formula which can be written in 1 or 2 lines, making our job a lot easier. Now as we try to understand the floral formula, before moving on with the study of the families, let us get a knowledge of some of the symbols that are being used by taxonomists. To start off with the discussion on the flower, we have the accessory whorls or the non-essential whorls comprising of the calyx, corolla and also the perianth. Now when we study the calyx and the corolla, they are simply represented by capital K and capital C. When it comes to the perianth, it is capital P. Now when we are studying these whorls, the accessory whorls, the number of sepals, the number of petals or the number of tepals is going to vary in different species of plants. Now to write down, to explain this number, we would count those number of sepals and petals and write it down as a subscript. We would have the capital symbol, that is, for example, we have calyx, which is designated by capital K. So just below this capital K, we would write down the number of its individual units as a subscript. Now in this case, we have an example where, say, the flower had 5 sepals. So we wrote down capital K with a 5 as a subscript. This explains us the number of sepals in that flower. Similarly, here if we have 5 petals, we would write down capital C and then 5 below it. Now these sepals could be, or petals for that matter, could be free or could be fused. In case we have fusion in these parts, then we would just surround this number by parenthesis. The parenthesis around the number indicates that these parts are fused. Now for example, when we study China rose or Hibiscus rosa sinensis belonging to family Malvaceae, this plant, this flower has 5 fused sepals. So we would write down capital K, then there would be the number surrounded by the parenthesis. That explains fusion. Is this clear? Now as we proceed, let us take up the androecium and the gynoecium, which are designated by capital A and capital G respectively. Now the same principle applies to these whorls as well. Now for example, if we have an androecium with 20 stamens, we would simply write it as capital A with 20 below it. Now sometimes, okay, we may have these 20 stamens which, which could be free or which could be fused with each other. Now in case they are fused, all the stamens are fused, we will simply put this 20 and into parenthesis. But sometimes, okay, the flower, the plants may be adelphous. Okay. Now in adelphi, okay, if we have groups formed, then we would mention the number of units into these groups and add them up. In case the units in the groups are fused, say in this case, for example, we have got 10 stamens which are fused with each other, then the number 10 would be in parenthesis. Now this type of an expression would explain that the flower has 20 stamens which are arranged in two groups of 10 each, and each of the 10 stamens in each of the groups is fused with each other. Okay, that explains fusion. The same thing would apply for gynoecium as well. Sorry. Now when we come into the gynoecium part, okay, the pistils. The pistils are made up of carpels. The carpels can be free or they could be fused. So if you have say 5 carpels which are free, they would be simply mentioned as G5. If they are fused, if we have a syncarpous gynoecium, then the parenthesis indicates fusion. In the gynoecium, in the carpel, okay, we have the fertile part which is the ovary, and the position of the ovary is also an important character for classification. That's where we could have a superior ovary, inferior ovary, or a partly superior or a partly inferior ovary where the exact position is not clearly known. Now in case we have a superior ovary, we write down capital G, which is the symbol of this ovary or symbol of the gynoecium, and simply have a small horizontal mark below it. Okay, that indicates the superior position of the ovary. In case it is inferior, we would write down capital G with a horizontal line above this G, indicating the inferior position. Now in case of the partly superior or partly inferior ovary, as in the perigynous flower, okay, we would write down G, and somewhere in the middle we would have an horizontal line indicating that the position of the ovary is not distinct. That's how we would explain the position of the ovary. Now considering the two essential whorls would also determine the sex of the flower. Okay. This flower could have only the stamens, which means gynoecium is absent. In this case, it is explained as a male flower or a staminate flower with this symbol. Okay. Similarly, we have a symbol for the female flower which has only the pistils, where androecium is absent. In case both androecium and gynoecium are present, then we have a bisexual flower with this symbol. Okay. So that will explain whether the flower is a perfect flower or an imperfect flower. Okay. Now apart from these symbols, okay, we would have two symbols explaining us the symmetry of the flower. Now in case of symmetrical flowers, they could either be radially symmetrical or they could be bilaterally symmetrical. Radially symmetrical flowers are actinomorphic with this simple symbol of a circle with a cross in between. In case of zygomorphic flowers, we have an oblique line with two dots across it, explaining bilateral symmetry. Okay, as in flowers belonging to the group of legumes. Okay, so the symmetry is clear. Now we move on with fusion of parts. As we have studied morphology of the flower, we have understood that there could be fusion between petals, sepals, androecium and gynoecium. That's very simple. Apart from this fusion, we may have fusion between two different whorls of the flower. Now this is explained by epipetally, where androecium fuses with petals or androecium fuses with the corolla. So in this case, we would simply write down capital C explaining the corolla and capital A and have a bent line, okay, above it. Similarly, we have fusion of the perianth and the androecium known as epiphyly, shown by this symbol, similar to the epipetally, with the exception that C is replaced by P. We have some flowers like Calotropis where the androecium and the gynoecium units are fused with each other. That's where we would have capital A, capital G with a bent line over it. Okay, so this will explain fusion of parts. Apart from this, okay, we would have two more symbols in the form of capital BR and EBR. This explains us the presence or the absence of bracts protecting the flowers. Okay. Now with this understanding of the floral formulae, let us now proceed studying some angiosperm families. In this section of angiosperm families, we have two examples from dicot group including Solanaceae family and Fabaceae family. Among the monocots, we would be discussing Liliaceae family. So with this, now let us proceed with the study of family Fabaceae. As we start with the families, okay, the first family that we discussed would be the family Fabaceae. Okay. Now this family Fabaceae was earlier known as Papilionaceae. In fact, we had a family by the name of Leguminosae, and Leguminosae was subdivided into three families: Cisalpinaceae, then we had Papilionaceae and Mimosaceae. Now later on, okay, as more and more characters or more and more morphological features of the plants were studied, these subfamilies were raised to the level of family. Okay, so here we have family Papilionaceae. Now to tell you something more about the family Papilionaceae, this name was mainly because of the shape of the corolla, which resembled a butterfly. Okay, now this butterfly, okay, in the ancient texts, okay, where we have the origin in Latin or Greek language, was actually known as a papillon. Okay, so a flower which resembles a papillon, and hence the family was known as Papilionaceae. Okay, later on, with the modifications of ICBN, okay, which explain that the names of the families must always end with CEAE, and the names must be dependent on a representative species or a representative genus. The name of family Papilionaceae was changed to family Fabaceae. Now when we start discussing any taxonomic family, okay, we have a certain set of characters which are described in a particular order. Okay. So as we start with families, first we go about with the geographical distribution, the habitats and the habit. After which we come on to the vegetative parts of the plant. Okay. So after the initial description of the geographical distribution and the habitats, we start with root, stem and leaves. Once we are through with the description of these vegetative parts, then we come to the inflorescence, which is the group of flowers, and with the inflorescence we proceed describing the flower. Now as we mention the flower, we describe all the four whorls in details. Okay. After these four whorls, we explain or write down a bit about the fruit and the seed. All this description is further concluded by the floral formula. After the floral formula, we would describe a few plants which are of medicinal importance or maybe of ornamental importance as per the requirement. Now to start off studying Fabaceae, okay, Fabaceae, okay, earlier known as Papilionaceae, has a habit which would have trees, shrubs as well as herbs. Okay. Now these plants are characterized by taproot system. Now the family Leguminosae, which includes all three, okay, has a characteristic feature of root nodules. Now we all know that the soil bacterium Rhizobium infects these roots and helps in biological nitrogen fixation. Hence, many of these plants are also used as green manures. Okay, they help in improving the nitrogen content of the soil. Okay. Now, as we move on with the roots, comes the stem, which could be erect as in some forms like the trees and the shrubs, or it may also be weak and help and help the plant in climbing. Okay. Apart from the root and the stem, the leaves are characterized by being alternate. Now earlier in morphology we have understood phyllotaxy. So when you are describing the leaf, we start with the description of phyllotaxy, which explains that the leaves here are alternate. Many of the plants would have leaves where the lamina is not dissected at all. Hence the leaves become simple. Or in case the leaves are compound, they would be pinnately compound leaf. Now we have an idea about pinnately compound leaves where we would have a main branch known as the rachis, on which we have got the pinnae, okay, or the small leaflets attached in a definite order. Now these leaves definitely show presence of a stipule. Now these stipules are generally helping as tendrils for the plants to climb. Now since the stipule is present, the leaf is a stipulate leaf. Okay. Now like most of the dicot families, these plants have leaves which are having reticulate venation. Okay. Now proceeding further, okay, after the discussion on the root, stem and the leaves, which are the vegetative parts of the plant, we now move on with the study of the inflorescence. Now as you study the family Fabaceae on the whole, we have the characteristic racemose inflorescence in this family. Now with racemose, we all know that these plants will have flowers arranged in acropetal order with the younger flowers at the top and the older flowers near the base. That sums up the inflorescence. Coming up with the flower, it is a regular and a complete flower with all the four whorls. The flowers are bisexual, which means the stamens as well as the carpels are present in it. But when it comes to symmetry, the flowers show bilateral symmetry. That is, they can be cut in two identical parts only in one plane, which means they are zygomorphic. So we have a regular complete bisexual flower which is zygomorphic. Now as we move on with each and every whorl, to start off with calyx, okay, there are 5 fused sepals, okay, which show an imbricate estivation. Okay, now let me tell you all that the estivation is actually the arrangement of the sepals and the petals in the bud condition. Okay, we have already discussed volvate, imbricate, twisted, quinquential and vexillary types of estivations earlier, okay, during the study of the flower, I mean. Okay, so in this case, the calyx shows imbricate estivation, but when it comes to corolla, the corolla would show a special type of estivation which is vexillary. Now as we have presence of root nodules as a distinguishing character which is unique to this group, similarly this character of vexillary estivation is also unique to the family Fabaceae. Now in case of vexillary, if you recollect, we have a posterior most petal which was known as the standard or the vexillum. In front of this standard or the vexillum, we have two wing-like petals which are known as the alae, right? So at the posterior most region, we have the standard or the vexillum. In front of this standard, we have the wing-like alae, and in front of these are two fused smaller petals, okay, which are boat-like, which are known as the keel. This sums up the vexillary estivation which is unique to this group of Fabaceae. Okay. So after the root, stem, leaves and the inflorescence, as we understand the accessory whorls, okay, we have the corolla which has a unique feature only for family Fabaceae. Further, when we have androecium, androecium in most of the flowers is characterized by presence of 10 stamens, and of these 10 stamens, one stamen is free from the other 9 which form one group, right? Now in this arrangement, okay, we have all the filaments fusing together to form a single staminal tube, right? So we have 9 fused stamens showing the adelphous condition. Okay. Now in this case, since we have two groups formed, where we have one group of 9 stamens with fused filaments and one single stamen, this sums up the diadelphous condition or diadelphous arrangement of the androecium. Once again, like the root nodules and the vexillary estivation, this becomes a unique distinguishing feature. Further, okay, as we move ahead with the gynoecium is characterized by a single carpel which has a single locule in the ovary. Okay, this ovary is also superior in position. So the gynoecium would be monocarpellary, unilocular and superior. Now since we have a single carpel, there is no question of it being fused with anything. Okay, so we have not mentioned whether it is apocarpus or syncarpus. Moving ahead, we have the fruit which is a legume. Okay, in fact it is the legume fruit which made taxonomists name this family as Leguminosae, or rather in the earlier part, in the earlier age of taxonomy, it was named as Leguminosae. Now the seed is characterized by the absence of endosperm. Hence, it is an exalbuminous seed or a non-endospermic seed. Now, in this case, it is very easy to identify the non-endospermic nature of the seed. Okay, for example, take up the pea plants, okay, or the beans, or for that matter, soya bean. You will realize that all the cotyledons in all these examples, they are swollen and fleshy. Okay. Now, cotyledons would be swollen and fleshy mainly to store food, and the reason why these cotyledons need to store food is the absence of endosperm. So that explains us the seeds being non-endospermic. Now, as I told you earlier, once we go through the habit, the vegetative structures, the reproductive structures, then we sum it up. Okay, we summarize this entire description through the floral formula. Now, as discussed earlier, we have this oblique line with two dots explaining the zygomorphic nature of the flower. This symbol explains that both the essential whorls are present. As we move on with the calyx, this is the explanation of a calyx having 5 fused sepals. With respect to corolla, we have 5 petals which are arranged in these 3 groups. We have the first petal which is free, then there are 2 petals which are again free, and then the third petals, okay, which are in front of the first 2 are fused with each other. That sums up the arrangement of the corolla. This type of an expression explains us the diadelphous condition of the stamen. And we have a very simple expression for the superior ovary, which is monocarpellary and unilocular. So that sums up the floral formula with which concludes the description of the family Fabaceae. Now, after Fabaceae, okay, as we have understood all these features, as we have understood, how to describe a family, after Fabaceae, let us now take up the next dicot family, which is family Solanaceae. As we have understood one taxonomic family from the dicot group, that was Fabaceae, let us now try to understand another example, okay, wherein we study family Solanaceae. Now, while family Fabaceae, okay, or the legume family had its distribution all over the world, we have this Solanaceae family which is distributed mainly in the tropical and the subtropical region and some of the part of the temperate zone. Okay. Now, this family is commonly known as the potato family. Okay. Some people also refer it as the chili family or the family of the eggplant, that is the brinjal. Okay. For us, let it be Solanaceae. Now, as I told you earlier that the name of the families must be based on a representative genus. Here, the genus Solanum has been considered as a representative type, which gives this family the name of Solanaceae. Now, as we try to understand its habit, okay, let me tell you that these plants are mostly herbs or shrubs. We rarely find some trees in these plants. So here we have mentioned here, we rarely have some small trees, and mostly the plants would be herbs or shrubs. Now, root, like every dicot plant, would be a typical taproot system with the primary root, the secondary and the tertiary roots. Now, in this case, nodules are not formed like Fabaceae. Okay, so the roots do not in any way contribute towards fertility of the soil or nutrition to the plant. Okay, they perform their primary functions, that is absorption. Now, when we are studying the stems, okay, in case of the stems are also rarely woody. As we rarely have some small trees here, in case of the stems, they are rarely woody and they are mostly herbaceous, which are aerial and erect. Okay. Now, when we study the family Solanaceae, we have an exception here where the stem grows below the ground. Okay. So, we have an underground modification of the stem in the form of the potato. Remember, when you studied morphology for the modifications of the roots, in the underground modifications, you had a tuber where the example was this potato. It is this plant belonging to the family Solanaceae. So, as we understand the habit, the root and the stem, we move up to the shoot system, okay, wherein we study the vegetative shoot of the leaves. Now, as we understand the phyllotaxy, the incision of the lamina and the venation, this family also shows simple alternate leaves, right? In this case, in most of the plants in the family, stipules may not be seen, and hence the leaves are referred as exstipulate. Remember, in Fabaceae, the plants were stipulate, the leaves were stipulate. Here we have exstipulate leaf, which may be rarely pinnately compound. Okay, so normally the leaves are simple, but only in some exceptional cases they may be compound leaves, right? Being a dicot, it has the normal reticulate venation in the unicostrate type. Fine. So with the vegetative structures of the root, stem and the leaves, we have the simple taproot system with herbaceous erect stems. Exception would be an underground stem in potato. The leaves are simple exstipulate alternate, rarely pinnately compound with a reticulate venation. With the inflorescence, okay, we could have a single flower on the inflorescence axis, giving us a solitary inflorescence, or we may have cymose type. Racemose type of inflorescence is not seen here. Okay. Now, if you compare Fabaceae and Solanaceae, we understand that Fabaceae had distinctly a racemose type of inflorescence, but in this case, we have a cymose type, or we may have a single flower which is solitary. Okay. Now, in case of this inflorescence, when we discuss individual flowers, we observe that these flowers are regular. They would have all the 4 whorls or the required parts by the flower. These flowers are bisexual, having both the functional essential whorls, and they are complete, which means it's not only the essential whorls, even both accessory whorls are present. Okay. The flowers here have a radial symmetry. Okay, that is, they are actinomorphic. Now, in this flower, we will have a calyx with 5 fused sepals. Now, here we come across a distinctive feature of this family, which is the presence of persistent calyx. Now, if you observe fruits like brinjal, tomatoes, chilies, you will realize that they have a calyx fixed to that fruit, attached to that fruit. Okay. Normally, during sexual reproduction, once fertilization takes place in the carpel, these accessory whorls, they wither away. But we have an exception in Solanaceae where the calyx will be persistent even after fruit. Okay, which is a persistent calyx, a modification of this unit. Okay. Now they are fused, and in the bud condition, they would have a volvate estivation. Okay, wherein there is no overlapping, only they touch end to end. From the calyx, when we move on to the corolla, once again we have got 5 fused petals which are having a volvate estivation. This is pretty clear. Now from the accessory whorls, we then move on with the essential whorls comprising of the androecium and gynoecium. Now most flowers from the family Solanaceae would be characterized by 5 stamens, okay, which are free amongst themselves, but they would be attached to the petals, and hence we have an epipetalous condition with respect to the stamens. Yeah. Now the stamens, okay, are uniquely dithecous. Okay, that was the case even in family Fabaceae. Okay, so most even in the study of the flower, we have discussed earlier that most angiosperms have dithecous stamens. These are no exceptions. When it comes to the gynoecium, we have 2 carpels which are fused to each other, making it a bicarpellary syncarpous gynoecium. The ovary arises from above the other 3 whorls, making it superior. Now, as the carpels fused, there is an intervening wall or the septa between the 2 chambers of the ovary or the locules, thereby giving us 2 distinct locules. Hence, this ovary becomes bilocular. Now, for an observation of this locule, just slice capsicum and you will have the distinct observation of the 2 locules in the ovaries. Fine. Now, as we go through the gynoecium, okay, after fertilization, as the seeds and the fruits are formed, we realize that the fruits here are basically capsules or berries. Now, just in the previous sessions, one of the previous sessions, we have understood something about the fruits. Okay. Now, among the fruits, as we classify them into simple, aggregate and composite, in simple fruits, we had a brief understanding about dry fruits, okay, which can be dehiscent, indehiscent or schizocarpic, and fleshy fruits. Okay. Berry is a type of a fleshy fruit. Okay. An example of berry from the family Solanaceae would be tomatoes and brinjals. These are distinct examples of berries. Okay. Now with respect to the seeds will be endospermic. The cotyledons do not store enough food and endosperm persists even after fertilization, even after the embryo is matured. Hence, the seeds would be endospermic. Now this entire description would again be summed up into a floral formula, okay, giving all these symbols. In this case, we have a regular complete actinomorphic flower with this symbol. The bisexual is very well known to us. Fusion is known. Now in this case, we have an epipetalous condition which was not seen earlier in Fabaceae, I mean. Okay, so we have this horizontal line over corolla and androecium. Finally, as we discussed the gynoecium, okay, we have a superior ovary here with two fused carpels. Now whatever we have written throughout has been summed up, has been summarized only in one line. This gives us an insight into the family Solanaceae. Now after this understanding about Fabaceae and Solanaceae, let us now proceed to understand one of the monocot families in terms of Liliaceae. After Fabaceae and Solanaceae, as we take up the discussion on the third family, which is Liliaceae, okay, commonly also known as the lily family. Okay, let us understand that this family will have a different set of characters as compared to the previous two families. Now here we have a monocot family, okay, wherein the seeds have a single cotyledon, and all these monocot plants, they have some characters which are distinct from those of dicots. Now as we go through the description of this family, all those unique characters will be discussed, will be studied thoroughly. Now firstly, as we understand the geographical distribution, we realize that these plants are found throughout the world. Okay, there is no place on earth where they are absent. With the habit, these plants would mostly see the presence of or the occurrence of herbaceous plants. Okay, in the previous two groups, we did have herbs, shrubs as well as trees, but here they are mostly herbaceous. Clear? Now this monocot family will have adventitious roots. Now when you distinguish between dicots and monocots, this is a unique character here. Okay, this is a character of distinction where monocots have adventitious roots, whereas dicots have a taproot system. Now beyond the roots, when you discuss the stems also do not follow the typical pattern of those trees or the shrubs. In this case, the stems may be erect, but they are not as tall or as strong as the dicots. In most of the plants though, we would have modifications of the stems as underground stems. Okay. Now in the morphology of the stem, we have already discussed underground modifications including corms, bulbs and rhizomes. The family Liliaceae would be characterized by these type of stems, which basically store a lot of food. Okay. So you have habit, the root and the stem to be followed by the leaves. Now considering this monocot plant, the leaf has to be linear with parallel venation, and this is exactly what is seen here. Okay, the leaves here are alternately arranged, they are linear with parallel venation. Further, there is no presence of a stipule here, making this leaf exstipulate. Now with respect to the inflorescence, we may have a single flower or they may be arranged in clusters with basipetal succession. Okay, in short, the flowers may be in cymose inflorescence. Moving further, okay, now as we come to the flower, okay, here are again a set of characters which make these monocots distinctly different from dicots. Okay, in the flower we mentioned, okay, that monocots would be trimerous, which means that the flowers would have their whorls in multiples of 3. Secondly, okay, in most of the monocots it has been observed that calyx and corolla cannot be distinguished from each other, which clearly means that these plants will have a perianth. Okay, that's where when we discuss a flower, we do not have the calyx and corolla here, but we would discuss the perianth. Now in plants belonging to Liliaceae, we would have 6 tepals. Remember, the units of perianth are known as tepals. So we have got 6 tepals which are arranged in 2 groups of 3 each. Okay, now all these tepals are free from each other. Now in the bud condition, we would have a valvate estivation with respect to the perianth. Now in many of these plants, the perianth would also be brightly colored, okay, as seen in different varieties of lilies. In the androecium, once again, we need to have their units in multiples of 3. That's where once again we have got 6 free stamens which are arranged in 2 groups of 3 each, similar to the perianth. That is the uniformity in arrangement of the floral whorls. Once again, distinctly they are in multiples of 3, that is trimerous flower. Okay. Now coming to the most important whorl, the female reproductive part of the gynoecium. Here we have got 3 carpels which are fused with each other. Okay. However, the septa or the intervening walls are intact, which helps us to know that there are 3 locules. Okay. This is what we will see as we take a TS through the gynoecium of a lily flower. Fine. Now further, okay, apart from this androecium and gynoecium, as we discuss about the fruit and the seed, we have fruits which are mainly capsules and the seeds are endosperm. Now endospermic seeds is once again a characteristic feature seen in monocots. Okay. Now in terms of evolution, when you compare dicots and monocots, monocots are considered to be more advanced plants with respect to evolutionary features. Now in terms of evolutionary features, many of the evolutionary biologists suggest that a reduction in characters is known to be a more evolved character. That's where the number of floral whorls have reduced. Okay. From the tetra to the pentamerous condition of the dicot plants, we have trimerous condition in monocots. Further, in the seed, there has been a reduction in the number of cotyledons, which were usually storing food, and now we have a single cotyledon and the food storage is managed by the endosperm. Okay, hence mostly we would have endospermic seeds. Now, as before, all these characters are once again summed into a floral formula. Now this floral formula explains us one feature which says that the flowers are covered by a bract, hence making them bracteate. Further, the regular bisexual condition remains as it is. Arrangement of the perianth is described as 3+3, a similar arrangement for androecium, with the gynoecium showing the superior ovary with 3 fused carpels is shown as here. Okay. So this explains the arrangement of a Liliaceae family, which is a monocot family as compared to Solanaceae and Fabaceae. Now with all such characteristic features discussed here, it will be an easy task for us to identify some plants from these 3 families. Of course, there are so many taxonomic families of angiosperms existing on the planet. This is just an example. This is just the tip of the iceberg for us to understand the morphology of flowering plants. Now with these studies, okay, we conclude our discussion on the morphology of flowering plants, where we have studied all the morphological features of the roots, the stems, the leaves, including the flowers, the seeds, the fruits, and used our knowledge of all these features to identify these families based on their characters. Okay. As we finish morphology, in the next class, we will be starting with the anatomy of flowering plants, wherein we will be studying the internal morphology of all these flowering plants, including their tissues.